I haven't done one of these in a while. Probably it's just the time hasn't been there. I haven't even done one of the self-publishing tutorials in a while either. But I don't like to do something and do it improperly, and I haven't had the time to really organize everything so that it's actually helpful. It's in my head, but it's not coming out. And for the few people who take the time to actually take these things take these things in, I don't want to bring something across that's difficult to understand or difficult to follow. And to those people, I say thank you for taking the time to go through them. But this one is just another installment of how to read my poetry, because I find that, as I said before in the other ones, they're not the easiest things to understand, and I don't write them so you have to sit down and dissect it. But there is a deeper meaning to everything that I write. The surface is always fun, like I said. It's always about the rhyming, always about the little jokes, the little innuendos and such. But for this one, I'm gonna call it the deeper meaning, the reason why I write the way I write, and what it is you're actually supposed to be reading. This is what I intend for you to read. This is me explicitly saying, this is what I intend for you to read. Not so much choose your own adventure and see what happens. This is more, these are all the adventures, and this is where the poem is supposed to take your mind. So the poem I'm going to use for this example is Some Guy. If you read it before, it's probably somewhere on the site. If you read it before, then that's great, but I'm going to read it for you, and then I'm going to explain what it's supposed to be about. But actually, before I read it, I'm going to say the term some guy, it depends on how you say it. That's some guy. That's a very positive inflection to the phrase, or that's just some guy. You see, and then you just, this is a term of disregard. So with that in mind now, as you read the poem, depending on the inflection you use, or depending on the your reaction to the person mentioned before some guy comes about in the poem, it'll also change the meaning of the poem for you. But let me read it for you, and then I'll explain thoroughly what all the some guys can mean, and how many poems you can actually get out of this one poem. Out of people, places, and things, things are the easiest to come by, but some take the harder road to destinations where some die. Tombstone reads shot by some guy. You sow what you reap. Speaking of reap, Earp reaped a lot of bad guys. He was some guy. But I more looked up to Jesse James. My mother warned me, you don't want to be that guy. It wouldn't matter anyways. I was a black guy. Remember back in the day when the bad guy was the last man standing and the other guy left with a black eye? What happened to that guy? It was tragic. He got stabbed and the stabber got shot through one eye. What happened to the shooter? He got shot by some guy. That's a shame. He was the dawn of getting things. He was some guy. All right, so step by step now, I'm gonna do it from top to bottom, so you understand where you can go with the poem. The first thing you have to realize is the poem says, out of people, places, and things, things are the easiest to come by. Things, remember that. The that's gonna come back at the end of the poem when the poem concludes. Things, remember that term. Things. Things are the easiest to come by. But some take the harder road to destinations where some die. Tombstone reads, shot by some guy. You gotta understand that it depends on who you are. That's some guy that did the shooting. Either be a hero, or it could be a villain, or it could be just some random person that existed. If he's a hero, he's celebrated, so he's some guy. And if he's a villain, you're still saying he's some guy. But if he's just a random person, just who cares who he is? Well, he's just some guy. Some guy just shot him. Man, he lived his life as best as he could, and just some random guy shot him. But the idea is that when you read the poem, depending on your personality, depending on how you look at the lifestyle of certain people, or the lifestyle, depends what lifestyle you put into the poem, your definition of some guy will change based on that. Also, as you keep reading, you sow what you reap. Speaking of reap, Earp reaped a lot of bad guys. So now I'm giving you an impression that maybe the shooter was an officer, maybe the shooter was a sheriff, maybe the shooter had some kind of eliteness to that person, so he was some guy. So the guy that died might have been a hero. So a criminal fighting the police, it's always the bad guy versus the good guy. So the bad guy might be some big name person, and the good guy is this big cop. And the story is telling itself now, so you understand that, you know because the some guy could be somebody like Wyatt Earp. So he's a hero, he's a legend, he's passed down through history to the point he's become a legend. So now you understand, some guy. So the story continues to write itself. So everybody now, their role has changed. It could be, you could have disregarded the some guys at first, but now they're important people, so you can't disregard them. Earp reaped a lot of bad, guys. That line itself, when Earp reaped a lot of bad, there's a lot of consequences to the way he lived his life. But he caught a lot of bad guys. So he was some guy. He was really some guy. But in the end, because of how he lived his life, there's a lot of tragic things that happened to him. He lost a lot. But regardless of how you want to depict that, in the end, you're gonna say he was some guy. He was a great guy with all the tragedies and all the terrible things because of what he did and what he accomplished in his lifetime. He was some guy. But I more looked up to Jesse James. My mother warned me, you don't want to be that guy. See, in reality, Jesse James is as big as a legend as Wyatt Earp. But nobody wants to be the bad guy in the story. Nobody wants to be the one that's the terrible individual. So even if Jesse James is still some guy, he's still a bad guy, and nobody wants you to. You don't want to become Jesse James unless you want history to write your story in a very derogative way. But like I said, it wouldn't matter anyways. I was a black guy. I remember back in the day when the bad guy was the last man standing and the other guy left with the black guy. What happened to that guy? It was tragic. He got stabbed and the stabber got shot through one eye. What happened to the shooter? He got shot by some guy. So we recycle back to the story now. We're going back to the beginning of the story now. That's a shame. He was the dawn of getting things. He was some guy. See, he was the dawn of getting things, but the first thing I said was things are the easiest to come by. So how could he be that impressive? In this world, the poem kind of degenerates and explains to you that nowadays we respect people not for their integrity or their personality, but the things that they can show us that they have. And that's how we describe some guy. That's how we give that some guy some kind of elation and make him feel good about himself. But he's just some guy. He's just some random guy on the street that got shot by another guy. For whatever reason, he got shot by another guy. One guy got stabbed and he got shot. Back in the day, those guys used to just have fist fights. They just used to get up and fight each other, and it was over and done with. But now that they're shooting each other and killing each other, it's become glorified. It's become unnecessarily grand. So, but if you go back to the beginning of the poem where it says, out of people, places, and things, things are the easiest to come by. So that guy, maybe he's a don, maybe he's a big shot, but in reality, he's nobody. And the guy that shot him was nobody. There was a time when these people had personalities and had something you could look up to and draw to and be attached to, but in reality, they've all become insignificant and become nothing. They're just some guy. But depends on your world and how you perceive these things. They're some guy, So the poem itself is a social commentary on our progress or evolution to how we depict heroes, or how we reflect on people's accomplishments, what we say accomplishments are. But depending on who you are, no matter who the person is, you will say there's some guy. Or it depends on who you are. If you're a judgmental, you'll be like, that's just some guy. That's just some guy. Regardless of their standing in life, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they've done, you'll still look at them and say they're some guy. So that's the real meaning behind that poem. It's just meant to be a commentary for that for a generation, if you will. So I'll read it again for you. So if you get it now, this is what it should sound like. Out of people, places, and things, things are the easiest to come by, but some take the harder road to destinations where some die. Tombstone reads, shot by some guy. You sow what you reap. Speaking of reap, Earp reaped a lot of bad. guys. He was some guy, but I more looked up to Jesse James. My mother warned me, you don't want to be that guy. It wouldn't matter anyways. I was a black guy. I remember back in the day when the bad guy was the last man standing and the other guy left with a black eye. What happened to that guy? It was tragic. He got stabbed and the stabber got shot through one eye. What happened to the shooter? He got shot by some guy. That's a shame. He was the dawn of getting things. He was some guy. And hopefully with that explanation now you can take that and graft it onto the rest of the poems. If you want to look for the deeper understanding behind the poems, look for how the words play on each other and the inflections that you can possibly have, and you'll realize the poem is having a conversation with itself or with you, the reader, depending on who you are. There's a conversation to be had, and this poem will speak back to you. Sounds good out there, but that's pretty much what I'm trying to accomplish when I write, for you to speak to the poem and see that this poem is speaking back to you. And thanks again for listening to me rant about poetry, because this is, outside of everything else that I do, this is the one thing that brings me that kind of pleasure, this expression with the pen and paper here. So thanks again, and appreciate the time you took, all 11 and a half minutes of your life. Anyways,